You're driven up, the gates open, and you're driven up to the entrance of the hotel. Immediately greeted with a glass of champagne. The holiday starts from there.
Penny Brown is the managing director of the historic Burgh Island Hotel in the southwest corner of England. It is a really unique property, historic. It has a really interesting arrival process for guests that you're going to learn about in our conversation. We touch on wellness, we touch on the guest experience, we touch on what it looks like to have and cultivate a thriving age diverse workforce. There's a lot of interesting points that Penny made around hiring older people as part of the team and all that they bring to a hospitality team. I really enjoyed that piece. And we also talked a little bit about the need for wellness, where things are going from here. There's a ton I learned from Penny, and I think you will as well. So let's get into it. I know you have guests from around the world that visit your hotel, but I wonder if you could, if you had to generalize, where do most of your guests come from?
Yeah, no, you're right, Josiah. They do come from around the world, but by far the majority of them come from the south of England.
Yeah.
They're people who, have heard of the hotel either because generations have been coming here to this area, to Salcombe and Bigbury and so on, or they're people who've seen us on some television show or the Poirot episode, or there was a movie as well. So I think the name is generally out there.
Amazing. Well, I wonder if you could describe for our listeners what the journey to your hotel involves. I imagine you get a fair amount of guests from London. If you're driving, it's around a 5 hour drive. You're located in the southwest sort of area of England, right? What is that arrival experience like for your guests?
Without wanting to boast here, the most common comment that we get from our guests is it was a magical experience. And I think that kind of sums it up, because it really is an amazing experience. You come from the hustle, the bustle, the turmoil of perhaps London or another city. You have a full on job, or you're looking after a family, and it's all rushing around. The journey down here, once you get off the motorway, if you're coming by car, and actually I would suggest people try helicopter or train, depending on their budget. But we have a heliport here, and quite a number of people come by helicopter. But once you get off the motorway and you're on the narrow Devonshire lanes, already these are transformation, because you're in a completely different environment. And then you come to the top of a hill, and when you get to the top and you start coming down, there's a gap, and you can see the island ahead of you with the sparkling ocean all around it, looking absolutely gorgeous, assuming the sun's shining. When it's raining, it's completely different, but it's very moody. It's also, I think, lovely. And you see the island, and you see the hotel, which is painted white, and it's so obviously Art Deco. You drive down to the beach where you park, just a car park on the beach. If you are, if the tide is out, we send a driver across, and you're driven across the causeway and brought to the entrance of the hotel. If the tide is in, we have our rather famous, infamous at times, sea tractor with its big rubber wheels that then crosses the causeway through the water. And that's an experience that a lot of people who've heard of the sea tractor, they come just for that experience.
How
You
would
get
you
to the other
describe the sea
side.
tractor? Because it's quite unique.
Well, it's metal and wood. It's quite noisy. It shakes a bit. and the wheels are really huge. They have to be to make it stable. So these are the four wheels in the corner. Then there's a platform, and there are metal stairs that go up that take you up to the platform. That's surrounded for safety by wooden railings, and then everyone stares over the wooden railings, gets vibrated across as the engine, bubbles away, and then suddenly you're on the other side. And that, I think, that journey just across the causeway, and you end up on the island, cut off from everything else. We don't have televisions. The first thing you see is the 600-plus-year-old Pilchard Inn, and then you're driven up, the gates open, and you're driven up to the entrance of the hotel, immediately greeted with a glass of champagne, and there you go. The holiday starts from there.
I appreciate you opening with that because I wanted to talk about the arrival experience because I'm really interested these days in what it's like to start out a stay at a place, and especially if the goal is to rest and recharge, and maybe you have a busy life at home, you're coming from London, you're coming from some other
Exactly.
city.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost that going through this multiple hour, very involved, you're taking the seat tractor experience. I feel like mentally it gets you to a place of being able to relax more. I don't know if that resonates with you, if you hear that from guests, but I feel like this might be the case.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Josiah. It's totally true. That is what happens. People walk in and they're immediately greeted by our guest relations team, um, and they have their glass of champagne, and there's someone talking to them, and it's funny, but I honestly think you can see people relax into it and think, "Wow, I'm here." And everything, it's like perspective. Everything seems to, like looking through the wrong end of a telescope. Everything seems so much, all the things that you were worried about when you left are, you know, seem much further away. So, yes, I think that being on an island psychologically helps enormously with that relaxation process and sort of speeds it up.
Yeah. Well, I wonder, Penny, if you could speak a little bit more about your hotel. You mentioned the Art Deco design, but I'm really interested in the hospitality that you aim to provide. So you have this journey, it's very thoughtful. You arrive with champagne. I imagine all of these things contribute to feeling like someone can really relax, right? But walk us through, I guess, from that glass of champagne, what happens then for your guests as they experience other aspects of the hotel? What are you doing to help them really relax and recharge while they're staying with you?
Mm. Well, I mean, it is a big issue nowadays, isn't it? The mental pressures, mental health, and even finding time to relax, because time just gets, it just squeezes out that personal time. Um, One of the things that we aim to do is take any responsibility for decisions away. So when the guest checks in and our guest relations team are looking after them, it's really all about how they would like their stay to pan out. And as you can imagine, some people just want to sit and read and really relax. No radios. We don't have we do have radios in the rooms, but we don't have televisions.
Has that always been the case, or that is something that's intentional to help people disconnect?
It was always intentional to help people disconnect, and it's very rarely that we get any complaints. So there was some football match recently when probably everyone wanted a television, and actually we did provide that, but most of the time it's the quietness, it's that rhythmic pulse of the waves in the background, Sometimes it's the wind that's also very relaxing. And the air, the that smell of seaweed and the saltiness. It just, I think, it's probably the ozone. People really do seem to wind down quite quickly, and we try and something needs to happen for people who are needs to be happening for people who are around the public areas, who are not in their rooms resting or reading or whatever. So the ballroom experience, historically, uh, guests dress up for that. We say black tie, but honestly, the majority of the time, the women come in their, beaded flapper dresses. Gentlemen are just so dapper and beautifully dressed. And that, and there's live music of some form every evening. The ballroom doors open up. There are double doors, and they open onto a terrace. And the terrace overlooks the sea, as indeed does the ballroom, because if you're inside, you can still see the sea outside. So when it's weather like it is today, which is beautifully sunny without being overly hot, I can guarantee you there will be dancing outside under the stars if people stay up late enough to the sound of the waves and 1920s music. It just transports you to another world.
Penny, if I could, I want to ask how prescriptive you are about this experience. You mentioned black tie. Do you enforce a dress code? Is it encouraged? To walk us through how you think about that and how you prepare people for experiencing and participating in this.
Well, of course, first of all, it's on the website, so it is very clear, and we have images on the website which show people enjoying themselves in the ballroom, and that's really where the sort of drama or theatre, I suppose, is. But we have a second restaurant which is smart casual. That's a seafood restaurant because if you're on an island, why wouldn't you have a seafood restaurant? We can catch fresh lobster, in the rocks at the bottom of the cliffs. So that's a much more simple offering because we want the food to speak for itself. Because of course, being so fresh, it's just stunning. So guests do have those options, and we have the pilchard, which is our third dining option, which is I suppose more rustic, fish and chips, that sort of style food, but that has its own atmosphere again. So three very very different offerings.
I appreciate you walking through that because I'm intrigued by this notion of asking things of your guests, right? I think some forms of hospitality are very much catered around show up however you want, do whatever you want, we'll make anything happen for you. But I was staying at a historic hotel in the middle of the US and 100 years old, and they had a very strict dress code and some elements of what you're describing. And it was kind of a new experience for me to experience, but it does
Mm.
transport you. And I think you mentioned this notion of theater. And maybe there's an opportunity here to ask something of guests or at least set this expectation because you know you are creating a performance here. You want them to be actors almost in that performance.
Yes. Well, of course, we do have, you may know this, Josiah, I don't know, but we do have um, quite a number of themed events which go to our Burgh Island Club members first and our regular guests, so that they always have the first opportunity to book because we're now, one is murder mystery, and that is our most popular. And I have to say that is so entertaining.
How does
Uh,
it work?
well, when the guests arrive to get their glass of champagne, they have to walk across the taped marked body or place where the body was found. So already when they walk in, there's this um, idea that a murder took place. And then we employ some very good actors who manage the process. But the great thing is, and it's true of all our events, the guests get to meet each other. It's very convivial. It's a bit of an old-fashioned word, but it's very convivial because they talk and they meet and they have a good time together. We have seen so many friendships forged with guests who now only come back to us with each other. So they met here,
Yeah.
and then it becomes a regular annual, weekend away or week away.
So you may have answered this already in that these events get you to move outside of how you normally interact. It makes you maybe more open to interact. But I wonder if you could speak a little bit more to how you encourage that, because I've been to many hotels or resorts where there's maybe a happy hour, they have drinks or wine and cheese, and all the guests are invited, but often you're still talking to your partner or maybe some people that you came with, and it can feel challenging maybe sometimes to start to kind of meet other people. Is there something about hosting these themed events that are getting your guests to interact with each other more than they might otherwise?
Well, I think there is, and I know it works, and that is that when our um, guest relations team, actually we have a director of guest relations who's been here 16, 17 years. um, he's absolutely fantastic, and we also have a Golden Keys head concierge. So we have very experienced and talented people who know how to make this happen. And the way it happens is maybe you're talking to Mr. and Mrs. Smith on one table, and they mention something that is of interest to Mr. and Mrs. Brown on the next table. And there are moments when you can introduce guests to each other, or you can make reference, or the barwoman, our bar staff come out and tell a joke. And then that, I don't mean to the whole room, I mean, to a couple of tables. And then that they carry on talking together. So it is that, we have to be very careful that technically, in terms of our etiquette, it is perfect. But I've found over the years that that doesn't have to preclude friendliness and openness and telling a few jokes. Those two things together are magical.
So you mentioned hiring actors for these performances. I have not heard about this from other hoteliers. Uh,
Mm.
what else do you do when it comes to these events or these participatory experiences you're doing for your guests that you're especially proud of, or stands out as different from what others are doing?
We have a summer ball, which is 90% booked by regulars. So we've had to introduce a couple of other events so that we can open up to people who would like to join the Burgh Island Club, or who are interested in perhaps more events that are more participative. So we do that. We also have a Tom Crocker Day in the summer, which is with music, but that's outside, and that's more to do with the pilchard, because Tom Crocker was the smuggler that was shot in the doorway of the pilchard many, many years ago. So there are quite a few things that we do, and we have activities. Of course, you can go paddle boarding. You can go fishing.
Yeah. You mentioned this guest relations team, and I'm really curious these days of thinking about what does it look like to understand guest preferences before arrival and think about accommodating those, helping people achieve some of the goals they have for their trip or their stay with you. What does that look
Yeah.
like for you and your team?
Yeah, no, that is a really good point. And we do pre-arrival calls because apart from anything else, we have to check for allergens and issues with food and various preferences. So we like to spend the time on these pre-calls just to get to know the guests a little bit. We certainly always find out whether they're celebrating anything. So birthdays, wedding anniversaries are very popular. People come to celebrate quite a lot of the time. I don't think there's an evening when we don't have anyone who's not celebrating anything. I don't think that would be possible. So we always try and help them enjoy their celebrations somehow. And then it is really probably more when the guest arrives and they have their champagne and they have their arrival conversation with guest relations, so head concierge, that we find out a little bit more about them somehow. And then we can ask preferences, and if, for example, someone consistently has sparkling water, then it we record that. So next time we don't really have to ask, or we can just say, your usual Mr. Smith sparkling, and of course that makes people feel special, and so it should, because that's what we're trying to do.
Excellent. Penny, I know we initially allotted 30 minutes for this conversation, but there's so much I'd love to ask you about. Can you go a little bit longer? Do you have a hard stop in 2 minutes?
No, I'm happy
Okay.
to talk a little bit longer.
Okay. I feel like in our preparation for this conversation, and working with Tom, got kind of a lot of things that we could touch on. I think one of those being you've built this incredibly impressive international career working with Raffles and Swiss hotels, um, you know, very different organizations. How did you have to evolve as a leader to move to this property and all the unique and special characteristics it holds? I wonder if you could walk our listeners a little bit through that personal journey that you went through.
Oh, that's challenging. I think there were a few things that helped prepare me for this. Um, One of them was having had previous experience of island life, and that was after Raffles. I had my own company called Intelligence Management Limited. And one of the management contracts that we had was with Sir John Medeski, who owned a hotel on the Galapagos Islands. Now that was very it was very different, but it was still an island, and you still had that almost slightly incestuous feeling where everyone knew each other, and sometimes that's difficult to imagine, how much effect that can have on people. So having run hotels with staff accommodation previously, as we now have here, you have an understanding, which is very, very important, of what it's like to manage people who live together, work together, eat together, play together. You wouldn't even have that in a normal family.
What's required there? What do you have to do to make sure that that's a good experience for them and for everybody involved?
It's difficult because some people probably come to remoter parts of the world because they're looking for something a little quieter or want to remove themselves, and maybe there's some darker elements or sides that they're finding difficult to manage. We do see that. We do see that sometimes. So welfare, staff welfare, is as important to us as our guest experience. It has to be, because it is the staff that deliver, and they do have to be happy. And I know that sounds a bit trite, but um, that is so important, because the mood and the feeling, you walk in and there's an awful lot of people who can sense, if it's a happy place or if it's not.
What are some practical ways that you do it? Because it seems so important. It seems so challenging, though, to keep the energy up, to keep the mood up of your staff, especially if they're living on property. Are there, over your career, have you learned some practical things that have been helpful in that?
I suppose here the most important thing is that the owner, Giles Fuchs, bought what used to be some sort of nursing home and converted it into staff accommodation to a very nice level. Now, it's on the mainland on the other side of the causeway, but the views are out to sea. Um, and we have table tennis there, and we have a big kitchen so people can cook. The most important thing is that people don't retire to their rooms and end up feeling lonely. I wanted to give everyone bicycles, but these these roads are a bit narrow, and I imagined getting bent bicycle wheels every day, so it was probably deemed too dangerous. But having hobbies, the opportunity to get out, there isn't a shop in Bigbury, so being able to shop, order food, things like that was something that we had to help facilitate. But I suppose the most important thing is that everyone has a friend at work. So they make friends and they have a friend, someone that they can talk to, and that they feel that someone cares about them as an individual. And that's where our heads of department and our HR manager and myself, they know that there's someone who cares about them and who will listen to them and will go the extra mile for them. And that's what we try and do. We talk about it with guests so often, that the word no doesn't exist when you're talking to a guest. It's always, well, maybe we can offer you this instead or something like that. And in the same way, going the extra mile for each other is so important, and knowing that, and that's what builds. I mean, it's a bit like Maslow, isn't it? That's what gives people the sense of safety, security, comfort, being loved. Yeah, all those things. They're very important.
You know, Penny, in our preparation for this, one of the things that you mentioned wanting to cover was the importance of encouraging age diversity in the workplace, and specifically the importance of attracting older workers into hospitality. And I want to create some space for you to speak to that. I would love to hear your thoughts on that. I've heard in the US some people talking about this being increasingly important, so valuable. I'd love to get your perspective on this. I think specifically maybe around what is why is attracting older workers into hospitality roles important, and what have you found useful in doing that?
Yeah, that's a really good one as well, because we're short of staff. The industry is short of staff. Okay, so what do we do? Um, and what happens in the season? How do we tackle that? And typically, the students who will come and work summer seasons, And somehow the industry quite often, and there's a whole raft of reasons for this, um, the industry attracts young people who just go from job to job. So they're like, you know, it's very transient. And because of that high turnover, um, in the end, a lot of hotels, and I've seen it a lot, Josiah, they don't look after their people. They don't even get the decent, a sensible induction. So they don't feel any of those things. They don't feel cared about, looked after, anything else. They'll stay so long as these a group of people who culturally they can latch onto. Very often they're the party goers. And then, of course, what happens is, they start not turning up for work. And the whole thing is this continual turnover. And the staff themselves, the people themselves who, it takes them a long time before they realise that, they have to settle down. They have to hold down a job. What do they want for their futures, And to catch someone on that particular moment is quite hard. It's very random. Having a percentage of older workers, first of all, brings a maturity. Normally they're not live in, they're live out, because they're more likely to be from the local community. And coming from the local community, they've got a family life usually, and they're much more grounded. So you do also find that they will speak their mind and take no nonsense. It's quite often, what time do you call this? Where have you been this morning? Am I supposed to make all the teas, or are you going to help? Because I suppose they're more confident. But for sure, on the whole, they're probably more reliable. But to get that balance between younger and older right would be the ideal.
Right. That's how this industry can have longevity, right? It can continue to thrive over time. There does have to be new people entering it, but there's so much value to hiring people with experience, people that maybe are more embedded in the community, as you mentioned. I feel like
Yes,
this can create this really interesting ecosystem. And in our interactions before, and in what you just shared, it seems that that's what you want. You want that diversity of ages because
yes,
there's so much power to it, and there's so much opportunity. I wonder,
yes.
Penny, if we could, just to bring our conversation full circle, we started out the conversation talking about why people come to your hotel. A lot of it is for wellness. They're looking for a break, so however you define wellness. I'm interested for you, though, either personally or kind of as you've been observing guests, I'd be really interested to hear how your perspective on wellness or taking care of yourself, however you want to define it, has evolved over the years, and especially into your current role now and some of the things that you offer through the hotel. How are you thinking about wellness these days and thinking about offering it to your guests?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I look back and I can remember everything being done by post. So you'd get a letter and you'd write a letter back. You could pick up the phone, of course, but you didn't have email. So everything, and you didn't have mobile, and you did, I mean, all the other things that have come along with the technological developments recently. So now I think everyone recognizes that life is so much faster. So it's so demanding. You can have 100 emails in your inbox. How do you answer that in a day and look after your staff and, I mean, any business, forget hospitality. How do people manage? And actually they cram so much more in. I mean, it can't be good for us, although I recognise that there's good stress and bad stress. And luckily, I absolutely adore what I do. But of course, that those demands are very, mm, yeah, they're very tough to manage and find time for yourself. So I probably do need to slow down, and I'm absolutely delighted when I see people come to us and say, "Oh God, I feel so much better. Just 2 days." And it's like a weight has fallen off, and part of it is perspective, but it's also that freeing up of your mind, the opportunity for the alpha waves to have a moment with you as well. And I think creativity is so important as well, that you have that space to even think about something rather than being reactive all the time to your inbox. I'm not sure if I answered you there quite, Josiah, but it's how I feel about it.
I actually really appreciate that because it's clear. I mean, we spoke a little bit about some of the specific events and experiences that you offer, but for me, it's helpful to hear at a high level, why does this matter? And I think when people, what I'm hearing from you and what I've heard from our conversation is you are making the most of the location you have, the property you have, this historic, beautiful property, the location, somewhat remote. It's this journey to get to it. But all of these things, you're making the most of it. And you're thinking about how do I provide hospitality that is exceptional, but it's also deeply rooted in the place. I think there's a lot of power in place. And then your guests then have that space to just read or sleep, if they want to do that, if they want to participate in one of your experiences, they have the opportunity to do that. But you mentioned kind of the word theater before, but you're almost creating the stage where people can pursue wellness, however they define it in many
Yeah.
different ways. So I appreciate you sharing that. I guess last question I would have for you is, um, I'm curious about, kind of what gives you hope as you think about the future. We've talked about people, wellness, place. What gives you hope? What are you excited about now?
I think that there is so much to come technologically. I find that quite exciting, although we do not really focus on technology because that's not what this hotel is about. But it's there in the background and helps us a lot. Um, I also think that there are so many ways that we can help each other by understanding better what we need. So in terms of marketing and the industry, um, I think it's a question of understanding where the world is going, how people are feeling, and what they actually want. And this whole idea of experience, finding something new, discovering something, telling your friends, having an experience that none of your friends have had. I mean, that could be a Reiki session that is, transformational. It could be discovering yoga. It could be, a moment when you're out at sea fishing and there's a lovely sunset and it's just so beautiful. I mean, there are so many things out there that we have yet to understand and build into our offering. So I think the future for the industry is hugely exciting because that experiential aspect, which can be very tied into wellness. I mean, we do artist weekends, for example, and we have an island artist, and she helps people express themselves through painting. These are all things that help people understand themselves a little better, or at least have something to brag about when they go home, even if it's only the fact that they saw Joan Collins here 2 weeks ago. You know, hey ho, I had to put that one in.
That's great. That's great. I love it, Penny. just watching you talk, I'm seeing somebody who's in love with life, in love with hospitality, in love with making people happy and fulfilled in their work, and that gives me so much life. It gives me so much joy to see that. This show's about the business of hospitality, but I want to infuse it with the life of hospitality. Right? What does it really look like to care for people? Whether it is our neighbors, if it's our people working on our teams, if it's
Yeah.
our guests. And I hear that from you, so I appreciate that.
I've really enjoyed talking to you, Josiah, and you are obviously very empathic as well. So, yeah, what can I say? Thank you. It was super.